Imagine a murder trial so sensational that it eclipsed the story of a lost hydrogen bomb. Discover the shocking case of Candy and Mel, an incestuous affair that turned deadly, that captivated a nation with its scandal, betrayal, and courtroom drama. Early 1966, a mid-air collision between two U.S. Air Force planes unleashed an unexploded hydrogen bomb near the coast of Spain. For weeks, the U.S. military's frantic search for the nuclear device dominated the headlines. But astonishingly, it wasn't the biggest story in America. Renowned journalist Louis Lapham recalls that the true focus of the nation was a murder trial unfolding in a downtown Miami courtroom. The story of the United States losing an atomic bomb, says Lapham, shaking his head in disbelief, got second billing to Candy and Mel. Candy and Mel. Their names might not ring bells today, but the trial of Candace Morsler and Melvin Lane Powers left an indelible mark. While not America's first tabloid trial, it broke through the barriers of traditional media, appearing in publications like the New York Times and Time magazine. On newsstands, it competed for attention alongside the Beatles. It was a magnet for television. The trial became a spectacle unlike anything seen before, the first true crime story of the modern media age, reality TV, before the concept even existed. But before the trial, there was the murder. Around 4:30 a.m. on June 30th, 1964, 60 years ago this month, Candace Morsler, a former model turned socialite, returned to her husband Jacques' apartment in Key Biscayne and found his lifeless body wrapped in a thin orange blanket. He had been brutally bludgeoned and stabbed. The crime was shocking for its sheer brutality. There were 39 stab wounds, and for the identity of the victim. Jacques Morsler, 69, was one of the wealthiest men in America, a pioneer of the post-war consumer credit boom, with a personal fortune estimated at $30 million, or about $300 million today. Men like Jacques Morsler didn't typically end up murdered, especially not in a place like Key Biscayne, an exclusive island community near Miami, later famous as Richard Nixon's winter residence. Detectives swiftly narrowed the list of suspects to two: Candace and her 22-year-old nephew, Melvin Lane Powers. Mel had moved into the Morsler mansion in Houston in 1962 when his mother, Candace's sister, asked the Morslers to take in the troubled youth. Jacques, seeing potential in the tall, strapping Mel, gave him a job at one of his companies. Candace, a stylish blonde still youthful at 44, enjoyed introducing him to her society friends. What soon became apparent eventually even to Jacques was that Candace's interest in Mel was far from that of a caring aunt. At some point, Mel and Candace had begun an incestuous affair. When Jacques discovered the affair, he promptly evicted Mel from the mansion and, seeking to distance himself from the scandal, relocated to Miami, where he owned several businesses. That was in October 1963. 8 months later, Candace brought their children for a visit. Conveniently, too conveniently for the police, they were all away from the apartment when Jacques was murdered. Police determined Mel had flown from Houston to Miami only hours before the murder and returned to Houston immediately after the crime. Furthermore, witnesses placed Mel near the crime scene. Around 10 p.m. that evening, he was spotted at the Stuffed Shirt Lounge, a bar on the Miami side of the Rickenbacker Causeway leading to Key Biscayne. According to witness testimony, he ordered a scotch and asked for a large, empty glass Coke bottle, leaving it behind. 2 hours later, he returned to the Stuffed Shirt, ordered a double scotch, and asked for another Coke bottle. Investigators theorized Mel might have been drinking to steel his nerves, and that he used the second bottle to bash in Jacques Morsler's head before stabbing him. Other discoveries included finding Mel's handprint in Jacques Morsler's apartment, bloodstains on the clothes Mel allegedly wore in Miami, and an abandoned white Chevrolet at Miami International Airport. The vehicle contained Mel's fingerprints and matched the description of the car seen leaving the crime scene by neighbors. It turned out to be a loaner from one of the Morsler companies, last checked out to Candace. To prosecutors, the implication was clear. Candace and Mel had plotted to murder Jacques Morsler for his wealth. A warrant for Mel's arrest was issued on July 3, the same day the World War I veteran Jacques Morsler was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery. The case against Candace took longer to build, but she too was arrested. This event occurred at Miami International Airport, with news cameras capturing the moment. "Mrs. Morsler, you have been accused of incest, adultery, and murder," began one of the reporters, thrusting his microphone into Candace's face. "What would you like people to know about you?" Candace's response was as explosive as an H-bomb. "Well, sir, no one is perfect." Thus began the sensational Candy and Mel show. Candace detested the nickname Candy for its lack of class, but it was the moniker the press had given her, and she would be stuck with it from then on. The attorneys involved in the case only heightened the trial's intrigue. When Mel was arrested, Candy hired renowned Texas defense attorney Percy Foreman to represent him. A large, imposing man with slicked back hair, Foreman was a legendary trial lawyer who had handled hundreds of murder cases and, by most accounts, lost only one. Foreman thrived in the spotlight. He had briefly been Jack Ruby's defense attorney after Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald, and his down-home manner was both charming and ruthless. He often boasted that he preferred trying murder cases because there was one less witness. Candy's defense featured the Houston-based legal team of Clyde Woody and Marion Rosen. The latter was a rarity at the time, a prominent woman lawyer. Rosen was strikingly beautiful and as sharp as any man in the courtroom. The last surviving attorney to have worked the trial, she recalls the defense team's first hurdle. "Let me just cut to the chase," she says. "We did not want women on the jury because female jurors, as a rule, are very harsh on female defendants. They really scrutinize them carefully, find fault with any little thing, whether it's their clothing, their makeup, their demeanor, their dress. Whatever it is, they're going to find fault with it. So we really wanted an all-male jury." A wrinkle in Florida law: women were excluded from being called for jury duty unless they opted in, made this fairly easy. Rosen got her all-male jury. By the time the trial got underway in January 1966, journalists had spent a year and a half reporting on the murder of Jacques Morsler and the revelations that had come to light in its aftermath. With the main event finally at hand, the appetite for all things Candy and Mel only intensified. The New York Daily News, sensing a circulation builder, sent noted crime reporter Theo Wilson to Miami to file daily dispatches. "Candy Morsler murder trial, follow Theo Wilson every day," advised a poster that showed Wilson, notebook and pen in hand, sitting side by side with Candy on a sofa. The image of the two women, Theo was short for Theodora, was plastered on subway cars and the sides of daily news delivery trucks for weeks. The trial itself became a media circus, drawing in spectators and journalists from all over. The courtroom was packed every day, and the intense scrutiny only added to the pressure on both the prosecution and the defense. Candy and Mel's case was not just about the crime, it was also about the personas of the accused and the dramatic courtroom battles that played out. This high-profile case captivated the nation, blending elements of scandal, intrigue, and legal maneuvering into a sensational story that would be remembered for years to come. You had a case that involved sex, money, and blood, which was bound to draw a lot of media attention, says Rosen, adding that, of course, people really enjoyed the sexual angle. Someone who did not was presiding judge George E. Schultz. He declared that, owing to the graphic nature of some of the testimony, no one under 21 would be admitted. Naturally, this only had the effect of fueling the public's fascination with the trial. Hundreds of spectators lined up daily outside the Miami courthouse as early as 5 a.m., hoping to nab a seat in the courtroom. The 24 or so seats reserved for the media were no less coveted. Interest in the trial reached a fever pitch and stayed there. It was not uncommon for Candace Morsler to be on the front page of a newspaper somewhere in the world every day during this trial, says Ron Smith, author of No One is Perfect, the true story of Candace Morsler and America's strangest murder trial. In fact, it was said that only Candace Morsler could knock Jackie Kennedy off the front page. Though television cameras were not allowed in courtrooms at the time, networks and local stations were able to capture Candy and Mel's comings and goings. Often, Candy would stop to share her thoughts on the proceedings in a breathy voice that conveyed equal parts sex appeal and defiance. Once, says Smith, she actually convened a reception for the media at her hotel suite. The case became a spectacle, blending elements of scandal and courtroom drama. The public was enthralled, and the trial coverage intensified. making it one of the most talked about events of the era. This fascination with Candy Morsler's case demonstrated the era's obsession with sensationalism and the intersection of celebrity, crime, and media. Normally, making a defendant in a murder trial available to reporters would be considered professional malpractice by a lawyer, but Rosen knew exactly what she was doing. Candice was well-spoken. She was beautiful. She was charming. She knew how to handle herself. And gradually it became evident that she was really great with the reporters. They loved her quips and the way she approached things. She was a fighter. She was not going to be cajoled into anything. While Candy wooed the media outside the courtroom, the defense focused on overcoming the prosecution's case. Dade County State Attorney Richard Gerstein seemed to be holding all the cards. The prosecution had the motive, a $30 million fortune, significant physical evidence, the handprint in the apartment, the fingerprints in the car, and the couple's demonstrated moral depravity, their incestuous relationship. Prosecutors seemed to revel in the details of Candy and Mel's relationship, including Candy's supposed predilection for receiving oral sex. One witness for the prosecution told the court that Mel once claimed Candy was pregnant with his child. Sitting in the courtroom, Candy gasped, then smiled at the jury. The prosecution also produced a parade of ex-cons and jailhouse snitches who testified that, at various times, they had been approached by Candy and Mel about killing Jacques Morsler. It was potentially damning stuff. Despite the gravity of the evidence presented, Rosen's strategy outside the courtroom aimed to sway public opinion in Candy's favor. The combination of Candy's charisma and the defense team's meticulous approach inside the courtroom created a dynamic that kept the public and the media thoroughly engaged. The courtroom battles were intense, and the defense's efforts to counter the prosecution's narrative were as dramatic as the crime itself, ensuring that this trial remained a captivating spectacle. But the defense team was unshaken. This trial was about a murder the state claimed Mel Powers had committed. Despite the so-called evidence tying Mel to the crime, no witness could actually place him in Jacques Morsler's apartment on the night in question. And what about the supposed murder weapon? No knife, or for that matter, a Coke bottle like the one Mel allegedly removed from the stuffed shirt, was ever found. The defense argued that the prosecution would have to do better than that. Foreman had an alternate theory of the crime, which he eagerly shared with the jury. Jacques Morsler had built his business on predatory lending and loan sharking, destroying countless individuals by driving them into debt. Morsler was not the family man people imagined, but a closeted gay man who would routinely invite sexual partners into his home and then discard them. Summing up his portrayal of Jacques Morsler, Foreman suggested that if each one of those 39 knife wounds on Morsler's body was inflicted by a different person, there still would be many times that number of possible suspects. If that didn't constitute reasonable doubt, Foreman asked, what did? After 7 weeks, the trial went to the jury. I think we had a few on the jury that thought they were guilty, relates former juror Fred J. Zoller. Maybe half of them weren't sure. After 2 days of deliberations, the jurors informed Judge Schultz they were deadlocked. The judge instructed the 12 men to keep trying. Following another long day, they reached unanimity, or something like it. I think a lot of the jurors didn't want to stay there, they were getting tired, says Zoller, then a post office worker who, unlike some of his fellow jurors, was enjoying the time away from his job. The trial's conclusion was as dramatic as its proceedings, reflecting the intense scrutiny and high stakes involved. The defense's strategy of casting doubt on the prosecution's evidence, combined with Foreman's alternative narrative, created a complex and engaging courtroom drama. This trial was not just about determining guilt or innocence, but also about exploring the intricate human stories and societal issues interwoven with the case. As the jurors reached their decision, the nation remained captivated, underscoring the enduring fascination with this extraordinary trial. On Sunday, March 6, the timing caught even Judge Schultz off guard. The jury came back and announced it had reached a verdict. After everyone had hastily convened in the courtroom, it was read aloud, "Not guilty." The photographers in the courtroom began yelling for Candy and Mel to kiss, hoping for a memorable front-page photo. Instead, Candy went over to the jury box and kissed the jurors. "Yeah," she said, "thank you," remembers Zoller. who adds that he came to his verdict honestly. I went by the evidence. Some would later fault the prosecution's decision to try Candy and Mel together, the theory being that it would not have been that difficult to convict the hulking, brooding Mel of the crime, but when his fate was tied to Candy's, it made it much tougher, because to find him guilty, the jury also had to find her guilty. For Lapham, who covered the trial for the Saturday Evening Post, it was less complicated than that. Percy Foreman told a far better story and told it in a way that the prosecutor could not match, he says. Not necessarily a true story, mind you, but a better one. After leaving the courtroom, Candy and Mel jumped into a gold-colored Cadillac convertible that had been strategically positioned outside the courthouse. With Clyde Woody at the wheel, the couple, accompanied by Rosen, rode off into the future. In Mel's case, a decades-long career as a Houston developer. In Candy's, marriage to a man whose luck was no better than Jacques. That husband, Barnett Garrison, suffered brain damage following a mysterious fall from the roof of the couple's three-story home. He spent the last 25 years of his life in a nursing home. The trial's conclusion, marked by the unexpected verdict and Candy's interaction with the jurors, highlighted the case's dramatic nature. The decision to try Candy and Mel together was scrutinized, with some believing it complicated the prosecution's case. Lapham's observation underscored the impact of Foreman's storytelling skills, which overshadowed the prosecution's narrative. As Candy and Mel left the courthouse, their future paths diverged significantly, adding another layer to the already sensational story. This case, filled with twists and turns, continued to capture public interest long after the verdict was delivered. For Candy, the end came in 1976, when she traveled to Miami for a meeting of her bank board, one of the businesses she inherited from Jacques, and was found dead in her hotel room, the victim of an apparent overdose of painkillers and sleeping pills. In what can only be called one final plot twist, she was buried beside Jacques at Arlington National Cemetery. When Mel died in 2010, the New York Times referred to him as one half of what was likely the nation's most notorious couple in the mid-1960s. But that designation doesn't quite seem to capture the cultural significance of Candy and Mel or the sea change they helped usher in.